What if I were to tell you there's a simple way to extend your time at intermediate depths, shorten surface intervals, and even feel less wiped out after a dive? It's not magic, and it's not a gadget. It's a different breathing gas called Nitrox. In this video, we're going to unpack what Nitrox is, why it can transform your dives, the real trade-offs you must manage, and how to plan your dives to use it safely and effectively. By the end, you'll know when Nitrox makes sense, how much time it can realistically add, and the rules to keep you out of trouble. Let's dive on in. You've probably seen cylinders with green and yellow Nitrox bands, or heard divers talk about longer dives on Nitrox, or sometimes called enriched air. Nitrox is simply gas with more than 21% oxygen and up to 40% oxygen. 40% is the maximum before you go into needing 100% oxygen clean gear, as flammability of the additional oxygen gets to be a larger concern. Because of that, and the restricted depths that we'll get into more shortly, these mixtures tend to be more exclusive to technical diving for handling decompression part of dives. So Nitrox tends to be more from 22 to the 40% range, with 32% and 36% being the most common blends, and often banked at dive shops, meaning that it's pre-mixed and ready to be delivered to cylinders for fills. Essentially, the more oxygen in the mix means a lower fraction of nitrogen in every breath. Lower nitrogen uptake is what extends your no decompression limits, or NDL. As we've learned, nitrogen is one of the inert gases that we are most concerned about to avoiding DCS, or decompression sickness. And thus, the primary reason as recreational divers we respect that NDL and try to avoid going past it. It's about the fractions of nitrogen that we breathe because it's a large molecule and gets absorbed into your tissues. Here's a concrete example at 30 meters or about 100 feet. On 21% air, your no decompression limit is roughly 20 minutes, depending on the model, your computer, and how fast you get down there. On 32% Nitrox, that limit is a little over 30 minutes, which is a substantial increase if that's your desired depth. The extra time is the difference between turning early or finishing the wreck or reef that you came to see. Another way to think about it is Nitrox shifts one of your bottlenecks for your dive times. Another important limit is the actual amount of gas, because whether it's air or Nitrox, you still get the same amount of gas that your body will breathe at the same rate. You still watch your SPG in the same way, but you are less likely to hit no deco limits first at those moderate depths. A quick naming note helps keep expectations straight. When you see ENX followed by a number, that number is the oxygen percentage in the mix, such as ENX 32 is 32% oxygen and EANX 36 is 36% oxygen. All Nitrox mixes are oxygen enriched compared to air, but they still behave like air in most practical ways for recreational planning. However, there are important boundaries. Higher oxygen is not always better because oxygen has its own limits, depth, and what we'll call the maximum operating depth, or MOD, that you can breathe from that gas safely. Which is also important to note, even air has an MOD of 57 meters or 187 feet with a 1.4 partial pressure, which we'll talk more about shortly. But 1.4 is a standard for most divers as a safe limit. We'll cover this more in the safety section so you can choose a blend that fits your plan instead of trying to force a plan to fit your blend. Next, let's go into more depth in what benefits Nitrox brings to recreational diving. First is that extended bottom time at moderate depths that we mentioned. It is one of the primary benefits, allowing you to spend more of your time on your dive at those intermediate depths. Less nitrogen in every breath means slower nitrogen loading and longer no deco limits. Even an extra 10 to 15 minutes change the pace of the dive entirely. Instead of a quick kiss of the bottom at 30 meters or 100 feet, it will feel more like you spend most of your dive there. You can work the camera without rushing and really take a good look for the hard to find things at depth. The second benefit is the shorter surface intervals for repetitive diving. Because you load less nitrogen on each dive, you often need less time on the surface before your next splash. On a busy resort schedule or a liveaboard, that can mean you comfortably fit in extra time underwater across the day. There is, however, an oxygen exposure caveat to consider when using nitrogen on repetitive dives. You cannot necessarily do safe diving 4 to 5 times every day for weeks just because you're on Nitrox. Your computer tracks nitrogen as well as oxygen exposure. And if you're running off of your dive computer with a CNS clock or an OTU load that trends high, skipping dives or taking a rest day is the smart move. You can also just use air on your next dive to give yourself some time off of the higher oxygen percentage. So if you're running Nitrox every day for quite some time and your OTU or CNS clock is getting close to 100%, the ideal is around 80%, you maybe take a day off. Or you can switch to air and let the CNS clock or OTU come down a bit. And this paves the way for more Nitrox diving afterwards. Basically, every dive, you'll see this percentage increase across dives. That is basically a running clock of how much oxygen you've been exposed to, or rather, your lungs have been exposed to. And to be fair, I cannot talk about this without also saying that there's a counterpoint. I've heard mixed things indicated by some dive computers and from just talking to other well-experienced divers. Not to mention, myself, I have been diving and I've exceeded that 100% on dives as well. To the best of my knowledge and experience, high running clock of CNS can at least cause irritation or even burning in the throat or lungs, depending on how sensitive you are to it. Some report blurry vision as well. Now, these are the known systems. There is some who believe high oxygen toxicity clock could have as much danger as taking a breath of your gas under its MOD as well, which can be fatal. And we'll talk about that shortly. So whether it's a little bit irritation in your lungs or something more severe, I want you to know about it. And the important takeaway is the conservative side is to be safe and keep that CNS or OTU clock under 80%. Take a day off or switch to air and let that clock come down. Give your lungs a break off of that high oxygen gas. And then you can safely switch back to Nitrox once the clock comes down. Okay, now let's talk about the third benefit, which is many divers report feeling less fatigued after Nitrox dives. The research here is also a little bit mixed, but the experience is common enough to pay attention to. If you end the day less groggy or more clear-headed, your trip is definitely going to be better. Older divers in particular may notice repetitive dives are more comfortable with Nitrox, and it makes sense to me. The body has to work extra hard to get that inert gas out of it. Your heart rate increases and it's flushing out as fast as possible. If there is less to flush, it makes sense to me that you'll feel better. Two other practical upsides are worth noting. During ascent and at your safety stop, having less dissolved nitrogen can make off-gassing more favorable and keep you away from necessary decompression procedures, such as when you cross over ENDL. And at the same depth, the equivalent narcotic depth, or END, which is the depth that you have to start worrying about gas narcosis with that gas, is reduced a considerable amount as well. However, it's important to note that some believe oxygen is also narcotic in many models, so treat the effect as a modest rather than a dramatic change. Let's also bust two stubborn myths to ensure we don't misconstrue any of the information on what Nitrox can do for you. I have to drive home that Nitrox does not lower your surface gas consumption rate and will not make your SPG drop slower. Your breathing efficiency is a separate skill and Nitrox doesn't replace it. If you're looking to remove that bottleneck to make your dives longer, check out this video here in the card that should pop over there. Also, two, Nitrox also is not just for deep dives. It shines mostly between 18 and 30 meters or 60 to 100 feet, where it adds meaningful time while staying within safe oxygen limits. However, some agencies like GUE have even made it their standard gas for all depths at or above 30 meters or 100 feet. So that's saying something. They consider it a safer gas to breathe in all cases above those depths. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video, now's a great time to like and subscribe. Help the video grow and more divers see this video. I post weekly content to help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And by the way, I have a monthly newsletter that's free to sign up for. If you're interested, check it out in the description below. So now that we went over all the benefits of Nitrox, we gotta talk about some of the drawbacks. Nitrox isn't exactly superior to regular old air. As I often advocate on this channel, it's a tool to be added to your tool chest. Of course, there's some situations, some trips that will just have you do Nitrox. And like I said, some agencies will only believe in using Nitrox. In that case, that's fine. But in this case, I want to drive home that it trades reduced nitrogen for increased oxygen, and oxygen has hard limits that I mentioned earlier, being its MOD. The key concept for MOD, which is the deepest depth at which a given mix stays at or below your chosen working partial pressure of oxygen, or in other words, its maximum limit that you can breathe from it before it becomes toxic to your body. You might find it hard to believe that oxygen is toxic, but in high enough percentage with a high partial pressure, it is dangerous for your body. And by toxic, I am talking about that a single breath could cause convulsions or even stop your heart. And it's an important thing to drive home with all gases that you could potentially breathe at depth. Know your MOD. Other less severe risks can include signs of visual disturbances or ringing, but it's worth saying you're not guaranteed an instant heart attack. It can be a bit random. It might just take one breath. It might take many. It's a little bit of a gamble. I don't want you to be taking that gamble. That is why you must always be aware of the MOD of your gas. Remember, air is 57 meters or 187 feet. All nitrox is going to be above that. So with more oxygen means higher concentration. And thus it is a bit unintuitive, but it means that MOD gets shallower. Most recreational nitrox planning uses a partial pressure or PO2 of 1.4, with a 1.6 used potentially when you're ascending, or it is generally more for tech diving. 1.6 tends to be a bit more risky, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and categorize as tech diving. You should know what you're doing if you're going to be doing 1.6. So 1.4, but that doesn't mean you have to have the standard. You could be a little extra conservative and do something like 1.3. That means your MOD is going to be a little bit smaller with all your gases, but in exchange, you're going to have a little bit more wiggle room and it's going to be safer in the long run. Okay, but let's take a look at some MODs for common nitrox mixes with 1.4 partial pressure. For EANX32, the MOD is going to be about 34 meters or 111 feet. For ENX36, the MOD is going to be 29 meters or 95 feet. In general, the higher the oxygen gets, the more shallow your dive needs to stay. Still, I want you to always know what the MOD is for the gas in your cylinder. And even though the MOD is more limited, you can stay at those intermediate depths longer because it'll push your NDL much higher because you're breathing less nitrogen. So keep those trade-offs in mind. And I should mention that nitrox is one of those things that is a little bit risky. So most places to fill your cylinders with nitrogen will ask for a nitrogen certification. So that's why you need to have nitrox training. It's a simple and a fairly affordable training to get. And I believe all divers should go ahead and get nitrox certified. And it will help enforce a lot of what I'm talking about in this video and help you get the discipline, and the discipline will matter when it comes to using nitrox and just being a safe diver in general. A proper nitrox course teaches you to analyze your gas, calculate and confirm your MOD, set your computer to the exact percentage, and monitor your depth to stay above that MOD. Courses are widely available, typically costing around $100 to $250, depending on location and whether the dives are included or not. They're worth it for the confidence and clarity alone. The course also drills in analyzing and labeling habits so you don't get mixed up with cylinders or forget what's in them. And don't trust the label from the dive shop. This is for them. But you need to analyze it before you use it and make sure it stays in your possession. I once heard a story that a diver did their own nitrox fill at a shop, but later a shop attendant didn't recognize the sticker and refilled it with a different mixture. The cylinders were still at the shop, and fortunately, that very same diver rechecked the cylinders before they breathed it down and found they didn't match expectations, avoiding a potentially dangerous situation and potentially deadly situation if breathed from it at an inappropriate depth for the MOD. Let's talk about some of the good habits for labeling too. As we mentioned, analyze every cylinder. Then you label it with the mix, your initials, and date. It is also a nice to have to put the MOD on there as well. I generally prefer the MOD on there so I don't have to calculate it later. It doesn't need to be a fancy label, many just use electrical tape, but it does need to be on top, visible and clear. Also, it's a good habit to do 1 decimal place when you analyze the gas. Many shops won't put a decimal place, and so they leave it to you as a diver to analyze it, and usually the thing that helps indicate that you analyzed it is that decimal point. 1 decimal point. You could do more, but 1 is the standard. I also want to mention that it's perfectly acceptable to fill a nitrox labeled cylinder with air if the system filling the air is nitrox or O2 clean, because you don't want a potentially non-O2 clean system to contaminate your tank. As long as the system is O2 cleaned, then you can use nitrox or air from the same system without potentially contaminating your cylinder. So that's important because you can go back and forth to 21 to 32% in the same cylinder, no problem, as long as the system is O2 cleaned. The trick is, if you want a specific mix, you'll want to bleed out all the gas in the cylinder before getting it filled. Otherwise, they'll just top it off and you'll have some strange mix in there, which might be fine if that's what you want. But if it's not what you want, you should bleed it down. Some shops will just do that by nature, and some will do it only if you ask them. So keep that in mind. And of course, vice versa, if you want to go back to pure air, or 20%, you have to also drain it down all the way in the same regard. And just in case it's not clear, by draining out, I mean open up the cylinder and let all the gas out. Regardless of nitrox labeling, you analyze what's inside before every dive, and you set your dive computer to match. Here are a few simple rules that keep you safe without making things complicated. Choose the mix to fit the plan, not the other way around. Know how deep the maximum depth will be beforehand, and this tells you what nitrox mixture you need, as your MOD can be just under that. If you don't know the maximum depth of the dive site, just kind of look at a dive map or make an estimate, like I want to go down to 30 meters. That's what I want to do. And so that's going to be your maximum depth. Go to 30 meters. It doesn't have to be too hard. You don't need to make it complicated. But then now I have a MOD probably to suit that. And I might have, my gas be a little bit deeper than MOD. So just in case I accidentally go to, by 30 meters, I also mean 100 feet. But just in case I go to 105 feet or 31 meters, I'm not totally screwed. So you want your MOD to be a little deeper than your maximum depth. It just depends on your preference. If you're really spot on your buoyancy control, then it's your preference. But with that said, you can play around with those numbers in this way. And MODs can be hard to remember, but there are apps like Multi-Deco and others that can usually tell you the maximum oxygen nitrox that you can have for a specific planned depth. You just need to decide which PO2 to go with. Like I said, 1.4 is a standard. If you want to be extra conservative, it's not a bad idea to have 1.3. And again, always be sure to analyze those cylinders. Don't trust them. It's even a good habit to analyze it if you think it's air. It doesn't hurt. And make sure you label the cylinders properly, or else, when in doubt, reanalyze. If you don't have your own analyzer, no problem. Analyze it before you leave the shop, label it properly, and then keep the cylinder in your possession. Oh, and quick note about Nitrox fills. Unless the specific percentage you're getting is banked, they often take more time than air fills, which means you may need to order them in advance or leave your cylinders there, depending if you're renting or you have your own cylinders. If the shop does have a very specific percentage banked, then you can often take it there and leave in the same trip. Otherwise, plan your Nitrox fills ahead of time. Of course, not everywhere will fill Nitrox as well, so you might have to find the right dive shop. Expect Nitrox fills to run $5 to $15 more per cylinder as well. It's a little bit more expensive. Also, another consideration before the dive is make sure you establish that everyone's Nitrox, especially if you're not matching, as the lowest MOD will be the maximum depth for everybody. Communicate with everyone and verify everyone has set their Nitrox properly on their dive computer in a pre-dive safety check. With these things in mind, strict adherence to your MOD, you can enjoy and fully utilize this fantastic tool in your diving tool chest. It's been a game changer for me, and I am positive you will also enjoy those longer intermediary dives as well. Nitrox is a practical tool that extends time where it matters most for recreational diving. It's not a hard upgrade of the gas you breathe, but gives you a powerful methodology of mixing more oxygen to replace the nitrogen in your gas, and that has some truly nice benefits. With considerations and real consequences that we as divers must mitigate with a bit of extra gas measuring diligence, communication with our mixtures, computer setting, and mindfulness of those MODs. If you're not yet Nitrox certified, all major agencies teach it, and it's one of the quicker and straightforward classes that you can do, which I highly recommend. If you want to keep improving your safety margins, watch my deep dive on decompression sickness. Check that out here. It's a great complement to this video. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.